we could just send home a YouTube link and say, watch this. But not only are you watching it, you have to answer questions. And then from a teacher point of view, you've got all of this wonderful data that allows you to assess your students, your class's comprehension with that video.
Hi everyone, I'm Andy Perrier.
And I'm at Lovegrove.
And this is So What, a podcast dedicated to cutting through the noise of EdTech and asking the question that everyone should be asking. Matt, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Andy. How are you?
I'm all good. So Matt, what are we talking about this week?
So this week, Andy, we're going to talk about flipped learning.
So a phrase that's been bandied about now for a couple of years, but let's start to do a little bit of a dive into it. What is flipped learning?
That is a cracking question. So the traditional teacher-student kind of relationship was where you would have a teacher at the front of the classroom and they were seen as the fountain of knowledge, right? And they would spend their time empowering and giving their students knowledge. The idea for me of flipped learning is that students are capable and are able to learn by themselves. So you allow them to learn content at home, hence the flip. And then when you come into school, instead of learning that content, you learn to apply it in different contexts and deal with misconceptions. That's how I think of flipped learning. What's your definition of it?
Yeah, it's exactly the same. So you're not spending that important relationship between the teacher and the students on that didactic content transfer, but actually the students have gone away and learned something, and then they can apply it and have the teacher support them with that scaffolding once they've learned how to do it, rather than what sometimes happens is the teacher teaches the stuff and then, right, go away and do something with it and bring it back. And that's where misconceptions might build because they don't have that support. So it's a way of being able to support learning that technology can absolutely help with.
One of the issues with flipped learning is that how do you monitor what students are actually doing at home? So if you've got a body of content knowledge that you want them to learn about, how do you trust that they're actually going ahead and learning that?
How dare you? How dare you suggest that you would give a video to a student to watch and then claim that they wouldn't watch it all the way through? I just think that's putting no faith into the student body. However, we all know that it's real life, and we all know that students often do just skip to the end. I mean, I remember even with that technology, poor Mr. Milton, the history teacher, who I think was teaching us about the Battle of Bosworth and read this page ready to be questioned about it the next day. And I didn't read it. Poor Ben Drew in the corridor was trying to tell me as much as he could. I mean, it's exactly the same. You know, would I have watched the video? Would I have read that page? Am I one of those students?
Well, what was interesting in my day, there was no YouTube available like that. Our teachers weren't able to send us videos home unless they kind of duplicated some VHS. I remember, I got really excited in school when at break time, I could see my teacher wheeling across the big old TV with a VHS player underneath, and we'd know we'd go and watch something to do with BBC in the next lesson.
The big old TV,
The magic right pen.
the 24-inch CRT.
That's it.
But because it was so high on the trolley and you were looking up at it, you just thought, yes, this is the content I want to watch. That ticking clock, that blue clock that kind of goes all the way to the top because the teachers had recorded it at 2 a.m. for us. So video is now the norm. The biggest sites in the world are video sites: TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. So we have a fountain of knowledge. We also have a fountain of risk, I suppose, in that there's a danger that we're sending students away into the wild west of video exploration, where the site is designed to lure them away from the video they're watching and to watch different content. So I reckon there's a platform out there that can do a couple of things. I reckon there's a platform that can support with the idea of flipped learning and can also keep content safe within an environment that means that the risk is completely reduced for the teacher. I suppose, Matt, my question to you is there such a platform?
There just so happens to be, Andy, that there are actually multiple tools that allow you to do this, to send videos home to students safely. But one of the kind of leading tools on the market, I would say, is EdPuzzle. Have you heard of EdPuzzle?
I've heard of EdPuzzle. Do we know why it's called EdPuzzle?
That's such a good question. I was thinking about that last night. I understand the concept of EdPuzzle. I've used it. It's a great tool, but I don't know why it's got the word puzzle.
Yes, well, it's yes, well, let it remain an educational mystery. We're focusing on a puzzle. I suppose our question should be immediately why? Why are we focusing on Edpuzzle for the purpose of this session?
So EdPuzzle solves a number of problems that teachers might experience with flipped learning, right? The first one, and a big one for me, is that accountability we talked about earlier. EdPuzzle allows you to track who's actually watched the video, and it doesn't allow students to skip to the end of the video and say they've watched it. You have to actually sit there and watch the video. Whether you're engaging with is a different question, but you at least have to play that video and get to the end without skipping forward, which I think is actually a really clever idea.
Yeah, that's really good because what we actually need to do is to make sure that what we're setting our students is done so that the
Yeah.
teacher's job, when the application comes in, they know that they're not having to mop up because the students haven't watched something. And then therefore you're just doing what you wanted them to do out of the class, back in the class, creating that two-tier system of, well, we've got some that have, some that haven't.
Mhm.
So we're just leveling the playing field. And again, making sure that all students are rising at the same time. All right, so that's one. That's accountability. What else is there?
The second one is safety. If you're wanting particularly younger students to watch a video from a source such as YouTube, you know what it's like on YouTube. Often when you jump on, there are other recommended videos, and videos start to play next. Edpuzzle just takes the video that you want and just presents that to students, and then once they're finished watching that video, nothing else happens afterwards, which makes the whole experience much safer.
It's really good in that YouTube's job is to make you watch more content. So they will try anything they can with the strip of potential videos down the side, with the thumbnails at the end of the video saying, watch this next, even the autoplay of the next video
Yeah.
that's cropping up in a playlist. It strips all of that out to make sure that it's just the content you want the students to be able to watch. All right, so accountability, safety, anything else?
So the third one is that you can add question points to the video as you're watching it. So not only are you just ensuring that students have watched the video, but you're moving. Edpuzzle's been really clever here. If we think back to PickRat, or the pick of PickRat, the passive, interactive, creative stages of PickRat, they've taken something that is classically passive, just sitting there watching content, and they've moved it into the interactive section because students are able to answer questions. You can't move on until you've answered questions that the teacher has added to that video, which is really clever because if we go back to what we were talking about before in terms of accountability, we could just send home a YouTube link and say, watch this. But not only are you watching it, you have to answer questions. And then from a teacher point of view, you've got all of this wonderful data that allows you to assess your students, your class's comprehension with that video. So, really clever concept.
We're massive fans of trying to get students to move from passive through to interactive up to creative. So any tool that provides that jump from one to the other, we are actually big fans of. And that's why we've chosen Edpuzzle as a tool to talk about. We really like any tool that can do that. So those are the big three, which are fantastic.
Just thinking to your favorite model, PickRat, in terms of the teacher's relationship to that technology, so we talked about the student's relationship there. How does that change what the teacher's doing with technology, Andy?
It's a great question. So, from a teacher's point of view, RAT, the rat side of it, is what is the teacher doing with technology compared to the traditional methods? So, replace, amplify, and transform. If a teacher was just to give a YouTube video or a link and go, right, off you pop, watch this, that's just replace. They're replacing what they probably could have read in a chapter in a book. The task stays the same, but more features are being added, which is exactly what Edpuzzle is doing. We're still getting them to consume the knowledge, but we're then adding the features of these stop points, these checkpoints with questions or with instructions. So it sits really nicely within Amplify. But let's do a little bit of a dive more into Edpuzzle's features, because what we care most about is, does this improve the classroom experience for students, and does it make teachers'
Mm,
lives easier? So let's
mm,
dive in. So the pick route was really important. Talking about the content library, this is something that teachers can do straight away once they've signed up.
What teachers can do, which again is quite clever, and quite a few platforms offer this kind of feature, is teachers can publish existing videos and questions for other people to use, which is a great thing to do because, as we know, teacher time is often quite tight. And you can search the content library for a topic, a subject, a key stage, and find a video that's already got pre-populated questions in. Huge time saving and a great way of teachers sharing expertise and resources.
We don't actually have to rely on other people's content, do we, when it comes to uploading and utilizing these tools?
So you can, as a teacher, upload your own videos, and this is something that I think is really powerful. I know many teachers that will record themselves narrating their slide decks for students that are at home. So being able to add that to EdPuzzle and again turn that from a passive to an interactive resource for students is really powerful.
What is the downside of using other teachers' content?
I remember back to the days of when I was downloading resources from TES resources, and you'd often, if you were particularly busy, you'd have a worksheet and you'd find out that some of the answers on it were incorrect, or that problem wasn't actually solvable. Or I've had it with Kahoot before, where I've quickly allocated a Kahoot to a class and realized that actually some of the questions and some of the multiple choice answers are actually wrong. So that's something you have to be aware of. I don't know whether EdPuzzle do any kind of moderation of content. I'm assuming they don't because of the amount of users that it has and the size of the library. So kind of approach with caution would be a key message there, I think.
Yeah, no, 99% is going to be absolutely fine. But just like
Mhm.
anything, we're teaching our students
Exactly.
about media literacy and digital literacy, and yeah, making sure that what they read is of absolute fountain of truth. I don't want to say they're lazy. They're efficient. Teachers are efficient, and yes, I've been stung way too many times back in the day with
Me
the
too.
yeah, with a resourced worksheet, and some of my students were just way too savvy to accept, or that you end up having to kind of solve a misconception rather than consolidate the learning. So yeah, very
Mhm.
annoying. So built-in questions is a really savvy part of formative assessment, but also it builds in the idea of student differentiation because students can check straight away whether they've got something right or something wrong. And there's a little button at
Mm,
the bottom that just says, watch again. And I
mm,
really like that because it puts the agency of the learning back into the hands of the student rather than just saying, I don't get it. They can then have the control over that learning, watch it back again, retake that little question. And it's that kind of like rinse and repeat and
mhm.
cycle that will then hopefully build um, on that learning. But it's not just questions that you can put at stop points, is it? There are other things as well.
Yeah, a teacher can signpost a student to stop and take notes on what they've just watched, which again I think is genius because knowing me, if I was a teenager and I'd been sent a video to watch for homework, I would watch that video as quickly as I can. But I like the idea of a teacher saying, summarize this, let's make some flashcards, let's take some notes, let's write down some key definitions. And again, that just helps reinforce the learning. It helps slow it down. And students are really used to very quick consumption of content now. And I like the idea that it moderates the pace for the students.
It's like guided reading for the Snapchat generation. It offers reflection points where, yeah, you absolutely wouldn't. You would just watch the video because that's the homework. But getting students to start to think about it, I wonder whether this is an amazing opportunity that EdPuzzle have to move from the interactive phase of PickRat into the creative phase. Because not only can you get the students to create notes, you can just offer instructions of things for them to do. So do
Mm,
something based on what you've just learnt there, and then watch more, and then build on that. So actually, EdPuzzle is moving very easily from passive into interactive, and then potentially even into the creative, just from
mm,
one tool and just from a YouTube video. So there's some
mm.
real power in that. All right, Matt. So multiple choice is great. There are other ways, though, that teachers might need to understand where their students are on the learning journey. So what other options are there when it comes to these checkpoints?
One of the other assessment opportunities you have within EdPuzzle, which I think is really clever, is the ability to add an open-ended question or open-ended questions to your video. So you stop students at certain points along that video's journey and ask them for a more substantial written response.
There's also the option to record an audio version of the response, which
Indeed.
is brilliant. So, in terms of accessibility and inclusion, every student has the opportunity to press on the microphone and just explain their thinking without having to have potentially the barrier of the keyboard in front of them,
I love
which is
that.
fabulous.
It's great.
But what's the downside, though, I suppose, for a teacher when it comes to the idea of data assessment marking?
Marking multiple choice questions is far easier than marking written responses, and we know that. EdPuzzle can automatically grade multiple choice responses. For an open-ended question, you're going to have to read it, and you're going to have some kind of rubric, I guess. Or for a voice note, you're going to have to listen. I'm particularly passionate about voice notes actually in this context. I love the idea. We talked about this before, haven't we, about removing barriers from students. The joy of being able to listen to a student leaving you a voice note rather than reading a written response, I think is really powerful. The research suggests it's a really good way of engaging in that content and for you to be able to assess that content.
Yeah, it is powerful. But then the teacher has a decision to make because I think they need to work out what data do they need when it comes to the responses that the students make. Do they just need those quick multiple choice question answers to look down that line, see where the red dots are, and to work out how do I then move forwards with with my lesson? Or
Mm,
do they want to spend a bit of time digging a little bit deeper and
mm,
getting those open-ended responses, getting those voice notes, and really listening and finding out what they know? It's going to be the balance between what data does the teacher want. They've got to make that decision. Don't just use Edpuzzle for the sake of it. What do they want to get from this in order to improve the student experience?
I would argue that a mix of multiple choice questions and open questions, like you said, depending on what you're after as a teacher, would be really powerful. Well, I guess one of the things that we need to consider here is that if students are constantly watching videos and answering multiple choice questions, that kind of activity might become quite mundane for students. So I like the idea of mixing it up. I also like the idea of, you don't just have to use Edpuzzle in the flipped learning context. You can use it in school too. And one of the benefits of that, of course, is that if YouTube is blocked, Edpuzzle will unblock that video for that student so they can watch it during that time, which I think is really clever.
You've touched on a good point there, which is understanding when to use it.
Mm,
So, yes, we're talking about flipped learning in the most classical sense of students
mhm,
taking this learning home with them and doing work on it and then applying it into the classroom. But I think you understand that you don't want students to get fatigued with the ed tech. So, a bit like in the previous podcast, we talked about Kahoot being a verb because that is the speed quiz behemoth. Similarly, we don't want every single piece of homework to be do an ed puzzle and
no,
do a quiz based on the ed puzzle. You've got to understand
indeed.
where is the impact going to be for the students? Where is it going to move them forward in the best possible way? What are you actually going to use that applied knowledge in the classroom for? So rather than it's just you're just doing it because it's homework and you've got the half an hour you need to fill, how
Mm,
is it going to move that learning forwards?
indeed. And I think coming back to so what, which is what this podcast is all about, and we've talked about this before, haven't we? This idea of using fewer tools, but using them really well, rather than just jumping on every single kind of ed tech bandwagon because other people are doing that or because that's what you think you should be doing. I love the idea of schools having their kind of school stamped apps. They think these are the ones, these are the core ones we're going to use, but then using them in rotation so students don't get bored of the Kahoot, of the Ed puzzle constantly. I think to be able to mix up learning like that becomes really interesting.
I think when it comes to teachers using ed tech, there's always the idea of a comforter, a safety blanket. If some teachers who aren't confident in using tools become confident in using that one tool, then they will use it because they feel comfortable with it. But then, yeah, you run the risk of if students are always answering those multiple choice questions, are they just then starting just to tap through again, a bit like the old speed
Exactly.
quiz of days of yore? We're giving them time to think with these stops in the video, but also maybe with these open ended questions, the chance for students to reflect increases that inclusivity because we're not asking straight away, what's the answer? We're actually giving that thinking space and that pause space, which will benefit every student, not just the ones that feel like they need it, but even those fast racers, a chance just to moderate their pace. Yeah, really
Mm.
important. So, Matt, let's think about kind of practical tips for teachers then. Teachers that just want to get started. If teachers have already logged on to EdPuzzle, they'll see that actually it is a premium product. It does require a full subscription, but there are ways that you can get started just to see whether it is something that is for you. What sorts of things can teachers do then to get started straight away?
So I think a really good starting point there is to look through the content library to see what type of content other teachers have made, the types of questions they're asking their students, and you can have a go at allocating those to your students just to see the types of responses that come in.
I think that's really smart idea. So if you can log on,
Mm,
immediately find something, immediately share it, and then see the
mm,
results of it, I think that's really important.
mm.
I think one thing that I would say is teachers must make sure that they use the data. So the multiple choice questions that teachers employ within the video, actually look at the data. Don't just settle for, yep, they've done it and they'll get it and we'll move on, but see where those lines are and see where the data is. Obviously, the more questions that get asked, then the more data points that you have and the better lesson that you can build moving forwards. So, Matt, there's something that we actually haven't touched upon, which is a huge feature of Edpuzzle, but within our little so what universe, it's something that we haven't really spoken about on purpose,
Mm,
and that's AI.
mm.
Because I feel like poor teachers are a bit fatigued themselves with all the podcasts in the world talking about AI and how it's going to change their life. We want to focus on the fact that it's just a tool. It's just a tool. And there are many other tools that we can use out there. But AI is actually a really big part of Edpuzzle, isn't it?
It is, and this is a complete game changer for me. Actually, it comes back to we talked about this in our previous podcast about Kahoot and the idea that when we were building Kahoots as teachers, it would often take half an hour to do a really decent Kahoot, right? But what Edpuzzle have leaned on now is the ability to use AI, and it scans through the video that you want your students to watch, and it will automatically generate multiple choice questions and give you those tricky detractors. And like we said in our previous episode, that's part of the problem with building multiple choice questions is coming up with decent detractors. And I think again, as a teacher, teachers are exceptionally busy. If you can lean on that tool to do some of that heavy lifting for you, and you can have questions generated for you on the fly. And I'm not saying you just take those, it's always worth checking and adding your own and doing things like that. But in all the cases I've seen, the questions are exceptional. They've worked out how to use AI to generate questions that make a lot of sense. And it's hugely time saving for teachers. You're talking about hours, aren't you, a term of time saved.
Absolutely. And I think that when we ask ourselves, so what? The same can be applied to AI. Is it solving a problem or is it a shiny
Mm,
thing? And in this
I agree.
instance, I think it's solving a problem. So let it assist the teachers, but then let the teachers then build on that, build those open-ended questions, find
Mm,
out where the data points are, and then
mm,
utilize that when the students are next back in their lessons.
mm. And Andy, just taking this back to the beginning here, we talked about flip learning, how we can improve flip learning. We certainly think that Edpuzzle has a really good place in the market to allow us to do that. Is it going to solve all of our problems, though?
So I'd say actually it goes a really long way because
Mm,
if that tool wasn't there, then yeah, students could just not watch it. And unless you had like I did in 1997, Ben Drew next to me in the line telling me the stuff before the lesson, a student could get away with not watching it.
it would have certainly solved a problem for me in COVID. I used to make videos for my class of 30 students and send them out, and then 2 days later, I'd find out there'd been 7 views, and I didn't know who had viewed it and who hadn't. So I think even from an accountability point of view, it's good. So Andy, after this discussion, I'm going to ask you a key question here. Do you
Yes.
think Edpuzzle is worth it?
Great question. I'd say that it is, but I'd say because it is a paid app, it's a premium app. School budgets might not stretch to be able to support a premium product like this.
Mm.
But I suppose my challenge is, what tools are being used in schools that you're paying for and underutilizing? So, what we need to decide is what tools across the school get the school stamp of approval,
Mm.
this golden merit badge that sits across the core apps that would really benefit teachers
Mm.
and students. I think that's the sticky point. It's a tool that needs to be discussed quite detailed at length with senior members, budget holders around where is EdTech going to have the greatest impact and how much are we prepared to pay for that student impact, for that teacher experience? I think it's win-win. I think
Mm.
it saves teacher time, the content library, AI, instant data. Like those are all quick wins that will save teachers time. So again, it's the old trope. So teachers have more time to do other stuff. But teachers
Mm.
don't have any time to do anything.
No.
But the story still stands.
Every little
Student,
helps, though, right?
every little helps. Ding ding.
Every half an hour saved is half an hour back.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That's important.
And I think also students, and remember, this isn't a tool to combat naughty students not doing the work. It's
That
to support all learners in being able to deepen their understanding of a piece of content that the teachers are sharing with them.
nice. So, Andy, are you ready to take the passive through to the interactive? Are you ready to improve our flipped learning opportunities?
Always, Matthew. Great chat. See you next time.